There are moments when the veil between life and death becomes so thin that we can feel the presence of those we have lost. When words written in someone's final hours carry such weight that speaking them aloud transforms a room into sacred space, and when grief held privately for years finally finds public expression and transforms into something both unbearably painful and strangely healing. Sometimes the dead speak to us through letters they left behind, through messages they knew we would need to hear, through final words they carefully chose because they understood those words would be all they could give us after they were gone. These are the moments that stop us completely, that demand we pause everything else, and simply witness the power of love that transcends death, the bonds that survive beyond the grave, and the courage it takes to receive a message from someone we loved and lost. If you believe that the words of the dying deserve to be heard and honored, that friendships forged in combat carry obligations that persist beyond death, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is bear witness to someone's grief and their attempt to fulfill a promise made to a fallen brother, hit that like button and subscribe for stories that explore the deepest forms of love and loss and the sacred duty we owe to those who did not come home. Sergeant Ryan Mitchell, United States Marine Corps veteran, walked onto the Family Feud stage during Veterans Week at 39 years old, carrying himself with the distinctive bearing of the Marines, that particular combination of discipline and intensity that marks those who have served in the Corps. He was accompanied by his wife Sarah, his two sons ages 14 and 11, his sister Amanda, and notably, his best friend's widow, Jessica Torres, who at 37 years old wore a quiet sadness that seemed to be her permanent expression. Steve Harvey greeted the Mitchell family with his characteristic warmth, immediately sensing something different about this family's energy compared to typical Veterans Week contestants. There was a solemnity beneath the surface, a sense that they had come for something more significant than a game show appearance, though what that something might be was not yet clear. Steve conducted his standard pre-game interview with Ryan, asking about his Marine Corps service. "Sergeant Mitchell," Steve said, "thank you for your service. Tell us about your time in the Marines." Ryan's response was measured, his voice carrying the controlled emotion of someone discussing something that still caused pain despite the passage of years. "I served 8 years in the Marines, Mr. Harvey, from 2002 to 2010. Infantry, multiple deployments to Iraq during the height of the war. I left the service as a sergeant after my last deployment ended." Steve nodded with respect. "That was a difficult time to be serving, and we are grateful for your sacrifice. I notice you brought your best friend's widow with you today. Can you tell us about that?" The question, asked gently and with genuine curiosity, caused a visible shift in Ryan's expression and in the energy of his entire family. Ryan took a deep breath before responding. "Mr. Harvey, I need to tell you something before we play this game, because I did not come here just to compete. I came here because I made a promise to my best friend before he died, and today I need to fulfill that promise." Steve's expression immediately became more serious, his entertainer persona giving way to genuine concern. "Your best friend passed away. I am very sorry. When did you lose him?" Ryan's voice remained steady, though his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I lost him 14 years ago, Mr. Harvey. His name was Sergeant Carlos Torres. He was my best friend since we went through boot camp together. We served in the same unit. We deployed together 3 times. We were closer than brothers. He was the best man at my wedding. I was supposed to be the best man at his wedding. But he died in Iraq in 2010, 3 months before his wedding was supposed to happen, killed by an IED while on patrol. He was 25 years old." The studio audience went completely silent, the light-hearted game show atmosphere evaporating instantly as everyone understood they were about to hear something profound and painful. Steve's face showed deep sympathy. "I am so sorry for your loss, Sergeant. Losing a friend that close, especially in combat, that is a burden I cannot imagine. But you said you made him a promise before he died." Ryan nodded, his composure beginning to fracture. 3 days before Carlos was killed, we were talking during downtime between missions. He was showing me pictures of Jessica, his fiancée, and he was talking about the wedding they were planning for when we got home. He was so excited, Mr. Harvey. He loved her so much. And then he got serious, and he said something that I did not think too much about at the time, because we all said stuff like that in case the worst happened. But he made me promise that if something happened to him, if he did not make it home, I would make sure Jessica knew how much he loved her, and I would take care of her the way he would have if he had lived. Ryan's voice cracked as he continued. 3 days later, Carlos was gone. Just gone in an instant. One moment he was my brother and my best friend, and the next moment I was identifying his remains and packing up his personal effects to send home. And in his personal effects, I found letters. He had written multiple letters, Mr. Harvey, letters to his parents, letters to his brothers, letters to Jessica, and there was one addressed to me. In his letter to me, Carlos wrote out specifically what he wanted me to tell Jessica, what he wanted me to make sure she understood about how much he loved her, and about what she should do with her life after he was gone. He also asked me to take care of her, to make sure she was okay, to be the friend to her that he could not be anymore, and I have tried to honor that promise for 14 years. I have been there for Jessica through her grief. I have helped her however I could, but there was one part of Carlos's letter that I could never figure out how to fulfill, and that is why we are here today. Steve listened with complete attention, as did everyone in the studio. What was that part, Sergeant? What part of your friend's letter have you not been able to fulfill? Ryan looked at Jessica, who was standing with his family and crying quietly, and then back at Steve. In his letter to me, Carlos asked me to make sure his last words to Jessica were delivered publicly, where other people could witness them, because he said that private grief is unbearable, but shared grief becomes bearable. He said he wanted me to find a way to speak his final words to her in front of other people who would hold that moment with us, who would help us carry the weight of his death by witnessing it. For 14 years, I have tried to figure out what he meant and how to honor that request. And then 6 months ago, I realized that Carlos loved Family Feud. We watched it together during our deployments when we had access to television. He said it reminded him of home and family and normal life. And I realized that this show, with you as host, with an audience bearing witness, this might be what Carlos was asking me to do. Steve Harvey stood absolutely still, his expression showing that he understood the gravity of what Ryan was saying. You want to read your friend's final words to his fiancée here, on this stage, in front of this audience? Ryan nodded. I brought the letter with me, Mr. Harvey, the letter Carlos wrote to me that contains what he wanted me to say to Jessica. I have carried this letter for 14 years waiting for the right moment, and I believe this is it. Jessica knows I am going to do this. We talked about it. She is scared, and she is not sure she can handle hearing his words after all these years, but she agreed because she knows this is what Carlos wanted. And I need to fulfill my promise to my brother. I need to speak his last words to the woman he loved. I need to do this for him. Steve's eyes were already filled with tears, and he looked out at the studio audience, all of whom were crying as well. The camera operators kept filming because they understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Steve made a decision in that moment. Sergeant Mitchell, we are not playing a game show today. What you need to do is far more important than Family Feud. You take whatever time you need. You read that letter. We are here to bear witness. This is sacred, and we will honor it. Steve signaled to the producers to stop the standard taping format and simply let this moment unfold however it needed to unfold. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope that was worn from years of being carried, the paper softened by time and handling. He opened it with shaking hands and removed several pages of handwritten text, the distinctive rushed handwriting of a young Marine writing between missions. Jessica, who had been standing with the Mitchell family, came forward and stood next to Ryan, and he took her hand with his free hand while holding the letter in the other. Before I read Carlos's words, Ryan said to the audience and cameras, I want to explain something. Carlos Torres was the best man I have ever known. He was brave and funny and loyal and kind. He was an incredible Marine who loved his country and his brothers. He was a devoted son and brother to his family, and he loved Jessica with every atom of his being. She was his whole world. The day he showed me her picture and told me about their wedding plans, I had never seen him so happy. That is the man whose words I am about to read. These are the last words he wanted Jessica to hear. These are the final thoughts of a 25-year-old Marine who knew he might die, but who wanted to make sure the woman he loved understood what she meant to him. Ryan paused, gathering his strength, and then he began to read from the letter, his voice shaking but clear. Jess, if Ryan is reading this to you, then I did not make it home. I am so sorry, baby. I am sorry I broke my promise to come home to you. I am sorry you do not get to marry me. I am sorry I will not be there to grow old with you, to have children with you, to build the life we dreamed about. I am sorry for all the things we will not get to do together, but I need you to know some things, and Ryan promised me he would make sure you heard them. Ryan's voice broke completely, and he had to pause for a moment while he cried. Jessica stood next to him sobbing, and Steve Harvey stood a few feet away with tears streaming down his face. The entire studio was crying, the audience, the crew, everyone bearing witness to this moment of unbearable grief being spoken aloud. Ryan continued reading. First, I need you to know that loving you was the greatest joy of my life. Meeting you, falling in love with you, asking you to marry me, planning our life together, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You made me happier than I knew I could be. You gave me something to fight for, something to come home to. Every day in this war, I thought about you. Your face was the last thing I saw before I went to sleep, and the first thing I thought about when I woke up. You were my reason, Jess. You were why I kept going even when things got hard. Loving you and being loved by you was the greatest privilege of my life. The audience was openly weeping now, many people holding each other, all of them feeling the weight of Carlos's love coming through words written 14 years ago, but still carrying the full force of that love intact. Ryan took a shaking breath and continued. Second, I need you to know that my death is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. This is not because you did not love me enough or pray hard enough or want me home enough. This is war. This is what happens in war sometimes. Good men die. That is the terrible truth of it. But please do not carry guilt about my death. Do not let anyone tell you that you could have done something differently. You loved me perfectly, Jess. You were everything I needed you to be. My death is not on you. Steve Harvey had to sit down on the edge of the stage, unable to remain standing while hearing these words. Several audience members had their heads bowed as if in prayer, the weight of the moment transforming the studio into something like a church or a memorial service. Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, but the microphone catching every word. Third, and this is the most important thing I need to tell you, you have to keep living, Jess. You have to build a life. You have to find love again. You have to have the family and the future that you deserve. Please do not spend your life mourning me. Please do not close yourself off from love because you think loving someone else would be betraying me. It would not be betrayal. It would be honoring me. Because I want you to be happy, baby. I want you to have everything we dreamed about, even if you have to have it with someone else. I want you to get married and have children and grow old and be loved. That is what I wanted for you when I was alive, and that is what I want for you now that I am gone. Ryan had to pause again, crying so hard he could barely breathe. Jessica was holding on to him, both of them supporting each other through this moment. The studio remained in complete silence except for the sound of crying. After a minute, Ryan found his voice again and continued reading Carlos's words. Ryan is the best friend I ever had, Jess. He is a good man, one of the best. I asked him to take care of you, to be there for you, to make sure you are okay. Let him help you. Let him be your friend. And Jess, when you meet someone new someday, when you fall in love again, do not feel guilty. I release you from our engagement. I release you from any obligation to my memory. You gave me the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, which was your love. That gift was complete and perfect while I was alive. You do not owe me anything more now that I am gone. You have already given me everything. Ryan's voice was shaking uncontrollably now as he read the final portion of Carlos's letter. I have to go now. We have a mission starting in a few minutes. I am writing this in my bunk, and Ryan is waiting for me because we patrol together and we watch each other's backs. I love you, Jessica. I have loved you from the moment I met you. I will love you forever, wherever I am. But you have to live, baby. You have to keep going. You have to be happy. You have to laugh and love and have the beautiful life you deserve. That is my last request. That is my final wish. Please, Jess, live. Live for both of us. Live the life I cannot live, and know that I am with you always, that I am proud of you, and that I love you more than words can say. Goodbye, my love. Thank you for loving me. Be happy. Your Carlos. Ryan finished reading and stood there holding the letter, crying so hard his entire body shook. Jessica collapsed against him, and he held her while she wailed with a grief that had been held inside for 14 years and was finally being released in this public space where other people could hold it with her. Steve Harvey sat on the edge of the stage with his face in his hands, sobbing. The audience cried together, strangers holding each other, all of them feeling the weight of Carlos's love and Carlos's loss and Carlos's wisdom in asking that his final words be witnessed by others who could help carry them. The camera operators kept filming through their tears because they understood this needed to be documented. This moment of sacred grief and profound love deserved to be remembered. For nearly 10 minutes, no one spoke. The studio was filled only with the sound of crying, of grief being expressed, of love being honored. Eventually, Steve stood and walked over to Ryan and Jessica, and he wrapped his arms around both of them, the three of them standing together in shared sorrow. When Steve could finally speak, his voice was raw. Sergeant Torres's words, spoken through you, Sergeant Mitchell, were some of the most beautiful and painful words I have ever heard. His love for Jessica, his wisdom in telling her to live and to find love again, his understanding of what she would need to hear, that is extraordinary. That is a love that transcends death. That is a bond that nothing can break. Steve paused, wiping his eyes. We cannot continue with any kind of normal taping today. This is too important, too heavy, too sacred. We are going to stop recording. But I want you to know that what happened here today matters. You fulfilled your promise to your brother, Sergeant Mitchell. You delivered his final words. You honored him. Steve turned to Jessica. Ms. Torres, your fiancé loved you so much. I hope hearing his words, as painful as they were, gave you something you needed. Jessica nodded, unable to speak, and just held tighter to Ryan. Steve made some decisions in the moment. The Mitchell family is going to receive the $20,000 you would have competed for because you came here for something far more important than money, and you deserve to be honored for that. But also, I want my foundation to do something for both of you. Sergeant Mitchell, you have carried this burden for 14 years, being the guardian of your friend's final wishes, taking care of his widow, living with survivor's guilt that you came home, and he did not. My foundation is going to provide counseling support for you and your family to help process this grief and this responsibility you have carried. And Ms. Torres, my foundation is going to provide whatever support you need as you continue your healing journey. The taping officially ended, but the Mitchell family, Jessica, Steve Harvey, and much of the crew remained in the studio for over an hour, processing what had happened, talking about Carlos Torres, sharing memories and grief, and attempting to find some kind of footing after such an emotionally devastating experience. The episode aired 6 weeks later with extensive disclaimers and warnings about its emotional content, and it became one of the most watched and most discussed episodes in television history. The segment of Ryan reading Carlos's final letter was viewed over 2 billion times across all platforms, reaching a global audience who was moved by the profound love and wisdom in Carlos's words. The response was overwhelming in its intensity and scope. Veterans organizations shared the episode as an illustration of the bonds between service members and the grief that survivors carry when their brothers and sisters in arms do not come home. Grief counselors used it in training to discuss continuing bonds with the deceased and the healing power of public mourning and shared witness. Thousands of war widows and widowers reached out to share their own experiences of loss and to express gratitude that Carlos's love for Jessica had been honored so publicly and completely. Many people shared that they had been carrying letters or final messages from loved ones who had died, and that watching Ryan fulfill his promise to Carlos had inspired them to find ways to honor their own deceased loved ones' final wishes. Ryan Mitchell and Jessica Torres found that the public nature of fulfilling Carlos's final request had profound effects on both of their healing journeys. Ryan reported that carrying Carlos's letter and the responsibility of delivering it had been a heavy burden that he had not fully realized he was carrying until it was finally completed. Fulfilling that promise, speaking those words aloud in front of witnesses, had given him permission to grieve Carlos more openly and to begin processing his survivor's guilt more effectively. Jessica reported that hearing Carlos's words after 14 years had been excruciating but ultimately healing, that his explicit permission for her to move forward with her life had released her from guilt she had been carrying about wanting to find love again. She shared that she had been in a relationship for 2 years, but had been unable to fully commit because she felt like doing so would betray Carlos, but hearing his words telling her to live and to love had freed her to move forward. 2 years after the Family Feud episode, Jessica married the man she had been dating, and Ryan walked her down the aisle in the role that Carlos would have played if he had lived. At the wedding, they read portions of Carlos's letter, honoring his memory while celebrating Jessica's new beginning. Jessica spoke about how Carlos's final words had taught her that love does not end when someone dies but rather transforms, that loving Carlos and loving her new husband were not mutually exclusive but rather both honored the capacity for love that Carlos had celebrated. Ryan gave a toast to Carlos, thanking his fallen brother for teaching him about love, loyalty, and the importance of living fully even in the shadow of loss. Steve Harvey remained deeply affected by that day in the studio, calling it one of the most powerful experiences of his career. He spoke frequently about Carlos Torres, about Ryan Mitchell's devotion to his promise, and about Jessica's courage in hearing those final words. Steve emphasized that what they had witnessed that day was not just grief, but rather love made visible, the power of words to transcend death, and the sacred duty survivors owe to those who did not come home. He used the episode to advocate for better support services for military widows and widowers, for improved mental health resources for veterans dealing with survivors' guilt, and for cultural recognition that grief is not something to be hidden, but rather something to be shared and witnessed by community. 10 years after Carlos Torres's death in Iraq, Ryan Mitchell attended the dedication of a memorial in Carlos's hometown that honored fallen service members. Ryan spoke at the ceremony, sharing how fulfilling his promise to Carlos, delivering those final words on national television, where millions could bear witness, had been the most important thing he had done in his life. He talked about how Carlos's wisdom in asking for public, rather than private delivery of his final message, had created space for collective mourning, had allowed strangers to hold the weight of his death and Jessica's loss, and had transformed individual grief into shared human experience. Ryan concluded by reading portions of Carlos's letter again, ensuring that those gathered to honor fallen service members heard Carlos's voice speaking across a decade, reminding everyone that love persists beyond death and that the greatest honor we can give the fallen is living fully in the freedom they died protecting. 14 years after Carlos Torres was killed in Iraq, his name was added to the National Memorial for Fallen Service Members, with his letter to Jessica preserved in the memorial archive, as an example of the love and sacrifice represented by every name carved into the memorial walls. Jessica attended the dedication with her husband and their 2 children, and she placed flowers at Carlos's name while telling her children about the brave young Marine who had loved their mother and who had wanted her to build the life she had built. She told them that Uncle Carlos, as they called him though they had never met him, had given her the greatest gift anyone could give, which was permission to be happy after losing him. She taught her children that honoring the dead meant living fully, loving deeply, and remembering that the people we lose remain part of us forever. Ryan Mitchell, now 53 years old, continued to carry Carlos's letter with him, though it was no longer a burden but rather a treasure, a reminder of brotherhood and love and promises kept. He spoke at veterans' events about the importance of honoring final wishes of fallen comrades, of carrying messages from the dead to the living, of being willing to grieve publicly so that communities could help bear the weight of loss. He emphasized that service members made promises to each other that survived deployment, discharge, and even death, and that keeping those promises was how survivors honored the fallen and found meaning in their own survival. The recording had shut down that day not because of technical failure, but because what was happening transcended the format and purpose of a game show, because bearing witness to such profound love and grief required stopping everything else and simply being present to it, because some moments are too sacred to continue as if they were ordinary. Steve Harvey's decision to halt production and simply let that moment be what it needed to be demonstrated at understanding that media, at its best, creates space for authentic human experience, rather than trying to package that experience into entertainment format. The studio stood still that day, metaphorically and literally, everyone understanding they were in the presence of something holy, something that demanded their complete attention and respect. If this story moved you, if Carlos Torres's final words to Jessica reminded you of the power of love to transcend death, if you believe that the dying deserve to have their final wishes honored and their last words delivered even when doing so causes unbearable pain, please honor this story by subscribing and sharing it widely. Share it with veterans who carry the weight of promises made to fallen brothers and sisters. Share it with those grieving lost loved ones who need permission to continue living and loving. Share it with anyone who needs to understand that public mourning, shared grief, and witnessed pain become bearable in ways that private suffering never can. Leave a comment sharing how you have honored a loved one's final wishes or how you have supported someone carrying the weight of promises made to the deceased. Let us create a community that understands that the dead speak to us through the living who carry their words, that love persists beyond the grave, that grief witnessed and shared becomes transformative rather than merely destructive. Carlos Torres spoke across 14 years and beyond death through his friend Ryan Mitchell, and his words about living fully and loving completely deserve to echo forward for generations, reminding us all that honoring the fallen means living the lives they gave their lives to protect. Subscribe and share to ensure that Carlos Torres and the thousands like him are never forgotten, that their final words continue to be heard, and that their love continues to inspire us to live more fully, love more deeply, and appreciate the precious gift of life they gave us through their sacrifice. Thank you for bearing witness to this sacred moment, for holding this grief with Ryan and Jessica and all who have lost someone to war, and for understanding that sometimes the most important thing media can do is simply stop and let love and grief speak for themselves in all their terrible beauty.